So I'm Richard Adams. This is Nancy Sorrells, and this is our new segment called Footnotes in Valley History. And be prepared for a jingle at any moment. I'm Richard Adams. I was once History Educator of the Year, and I didn't make good grades in history, but Nancy did make good grades in history, and she's a real historian. So today we're going to talk about those. When you're riding, Nancy, you're riding up the interstate. What are some of those names of some of those places nobody knows how to pronounce?
Oh, well, there's Buena Vista, and there's RAPHINE, and let's talk about RAPHINE today. How about that?
And my favorite, McGaheysville.
Oh, McGaheysville is the best. Yes.
Oh yeah. Weir's Cave. I was told when I went to JMU in 1977 or sometime in the last century, I was coming up from Danville, and I saw this sign that's a WEYERS cave, and I went, man, what's that? And Evelyn Lafferty, who I think lives in Waynesboro now, she was from Nelson County. She said, no, I think she was actually from Waynesboro. She said, "Oh, Wyer's Cave," and I said it that way for years, and I didn't know any difference.
Well, and of course we have the ultimate one, Stanton, which nobody outside of Stanton knows how to pronounce.
Yeah, I've lived here 30 years. I thought it was Staunton. I'm just kidding.
Well, did I ever tell you about the funny trip I had out to the Grand Canyon? Oh, years ago, my husband and I were at the Grand Canyon on the North Rim, and they have a little post office there. A little man in a National Park Service uniform runs the post office, and you can get your postcard stamped that says North Rim Grand Canyon.
Man, that's big time.
And so my father was living in Stanton at the time, and I thought, I'm going to send him a postcard. So I addressed it to John Taylor, Stanton, Virginia, and stood in line. The little man's hand stamping them, and he hand stamps it, and he looks, and he says, "Oh, Stanton, Virginia." And I said, now, keep in mind that we're in the Grand Canyon.
Right. And a long way from Stanton.
A long way from Stanton. And he says, "Oh, Stanton, Virginia." And I said, "How do you know how to say Stanton?" And he said, "Because I'm from Buena Vista."
Buena Vista is a whole show by itself.
That's right. Yeah. We can talk about Buena Vista one day if you want and how it got its name. But
yeah. So tell me, I already know because, I was History Educator of the Year.
That's right.
By the Augusta Historical Society. So RAPHINE, I mean, come on. Cyrus McCormick's there. I know that, but give me some RAPHINE stuff, Nancy.
Okay, well, to understand this, you have to actually go to Steele's Tavern, which there's not too much difficulty in pronouncing that, although a lot of locals call it Midway because it's midway between Stanton and Lexington on the Valley Turnpike. But anyway, in Steele's Tavern, there is a historic marker, and I don't remember, the Augusta County Rockbridge line goes through the middle of Steele's Tavern. Okay. And I can't remember if the marker's on the Rockbridge side or the Augusta side. But anyway, the marker says that near here, two inventors were born and invented two important items. It must have been something in the water. But one of those inventors was Cyrus McCormick. And Cyrus McCormick's pretty well known. His invention was the grain reaper. And there's a farm up the road there that the county line also goes through, where he invented his reaper in the 1830s.
And that's Virginia Tech runs
Virginia Tech runs an experimental station there now, but it's a little wayside stop, and you can go, and when there's not a pandemic going on, you can go in and visit the mill and the blacksmith shop where he tinkered around and invented that reaper. But just less than a mile from there was another invention by another guy, James Edward Allen Gibbs, and he invented
that last name?
Gibbs, Gibbs.
Oh, that's a Stanton name to start with. Go ahead.
Yeah, but James Edward Allen Gibbs, and he also was pretty famous and made pretty wealthy by an invention. He probably didn't reach the heights that Cyrus McCormick did with his reaper, but his was the sewing machine. And people always think of Elias Howe and other people like that with the sewing machine, but
Singer. I thought Singer invented
Singer. There were a bunch of different sewing machines kind of invented about the same time in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. So, and Gibbs was one of them, and so he was born in what is now the village of RAPHINE, but of course it wasn't RAPHINE then. But he was born on August 1st, 1829, and he always had a kind of a mechanical mind. Again, maybe it's something in the water, because that's the way the McCormicks were too.
So it's Old Order or Associate Reformed Presbyterians. It's got to be that.
Well, I know that McCormick was a Presbyterian. I'm not sure about Gibbs, but I can look into that for another footnote
Another
in history.
episode.
Yes, but the chances are that he probably was Presbyterian. Anyway, he was tinkered around, and he was good at machinery and things like that. And got a job out in West Virginia, working in the milling operations, milling and surveying. And he happened to run across what he saw was just a crude picture, a woodcut, an illustration of one of these new sewing machine type of things. It was just a drawing. And from that, he put together, he had an idea, and he put together, invented what he called his sewing machine. And this was in the 1850s, right before the Civil War that broke out in 1861. So, but before, in the 1850s, he met up with a guy, a father and son team up in New York. And they were, let's see, their names were James and Charles Wilcox. And they were kind of the business end of things. And the father was the financier, and then the son was kind of a tinkerer too. And so Gibbs and Wilcox got together and invented a sewing machine called Wilcox and Gibbs sewing machine. And they started selling these machines in the late 1850s, right before the Civil War. And Gibbs made a little bit of money off of it, nothing spectacular. Then the Civil War breaks out. Now, this time he's living in West Virginia, but
So when you started out, he was in Western Virginia. Where was he in West Virginia? Virginia seceded in. I mean, West Virginia.
Yeah. When he was out there, he was in Western Virginia.
Right.
And I don't know where it was in West Virginia, but he was working out there, just in a town out there, doing surveying work and tinkering around in milling.
Right.
And so because the war broke out and West Virginia broke away from Virginia, he thought it'd be safer to bring his family back to his birthplace in Rockbridge County. And so he brought the family back, and that's to his birthplace and the family farm, and that's where they lived for the rest of his life and their lives. So the war breaks out. He loses all communication with his business partner in New York, and figures that, he's, that venture has gone down the tubes. The war,
and after all, they were Yankees.
They were Yankees.
They were Yankees.
And so, the war ends. Everybody's getting the economy going back in. Everybody's getting back to being a one united country again. Of course, West Virginia is now West Virginia. So he decides he's going to go up to New York City and check on his business, see if there's anything left of it. He figured it all gone down the tubes during the war. So he goes up there, and he finds out that his partners, the Wilcoxes, have protected his interest in it and have made a mint during the Civil War. I mean, actually, so they made a mint during the Civil War because they could invest it, and you need a sewing machine if you're making millions of uniforms, right?
You gotta have one.
Yeah, you gotta have one. And so he finds out he's a very rich man, and so he renews the partnership, and he decides that what he's going to do is he's going to be the sales representative for the South, to kind of get this machine, this little machine, into everybody's hands, because it's such a time saver. And so that's what he does. He starts selling it in the South, and he becomes quite wealthy. And he gets business. In fact, one of his biggest, the people that he got to give a testimonial about the sewing machine was Robert E. Lee. And who moves to Lexington and becomes president of Washington College to try to get the South going again. And Lee says education and getting the economy booming again is what's going to make our country strong together again. So Lee actually writes a little testimonial, and I've got it here. I can read it. So he says, yes, the Wilcox and Gibbs sewing machine reached here safely yesterday. Esteem for its inventor, its simple mechanism, and the experience my daughters have in operating it, making it a great favorite in my family, whose labor it lightens. So it became very popular, In fact, years ago, there was a local lady that I interviewed, and she had the little machine. It wasn't much bigger than my laptop, and that they had
So
been passed
it was
on.
a desktop.
It was a desktop
It
sewing
wasn't
machine.
like the wooden Singer things that had the pedals on them. Did it have
Well, but
pedals on it?
no, but Singers, those machines started off smaller as well.
Okay, okay.
And then they, as they perfected things and added things,
Did you spin it with your hand like this? I
yeah,
mean,
well, it had a wheel. It had a wheel on it, right?
okay, yeah.
That you would spin. And there's a difference between his machine, and there were a half a dozen different sewing machines kind of on the market at this time, Singer being one of them, and some others. But the difference between theirs and his was that his machine used a chain stitch, which used only one piece of thread, whereas those other machines used two pieces of thread. Today's modern sewing machine has a bobbin at the
Right.
inside it, and then they have the spool at the top. So it's two pieces of thread that are stitching together rather than a chain stitch. And interesting sidelight is that Wilcox and Gibbs's machine actually still exists today, much more modernized, of course, in a factory setting, because they tend to use that chain stitch, whereas in the home setting and in the seamstress world, they use the two thread settings. But anyway, so he sells it everywhere, and it was available. Lots of these machines, the original versions, show up locally at auctions and things like that. It cost, and I can tell you how much it cost in the 1870s. Just the basic model was $55.
Man,
Which is about $1,300 in today's money.
that was like a man with a manual transmission.
Yeah. Now, if you got it in a mahogany case, then it was $67, which is about $2,000 today. So not cheap, but
if you're making your own clothes, it's
making your own clothes. It's
like buying a stove. Yeah.
That's right. It's an investment, and it's a huge labor saving device. So that still doesn't tell us how RAPHINE got his name.
I'm stumped.
So what happens is Civil War's over. People like Lee and others are trying to invest in the economy of the South and get it back on its feet. One of the main thrusts for getting the economy going again was the need for this newfangled thing called the railroad. And so there was a railroad, the B&O Railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio, that was pushing down into Augusta County, down through the valley, or up the valley. If you're going south, you go up the valley from Baltimore, going through Stanton, going on to
took a hard left there at the watering can. I got a picture of it.
Well, yes, right under the watering can. It's the same railroad that Grandma Moses arrived on, but that's another little video.
Whole segment, yeah.
That's a whole nother segment. But so in 1883, the B&O Railroad is making its push from Stanton to Lexington. It really kind of petered out and never got much further than Lexington, and the B&O doesn't even exist today. But it was a pretty big deal until the 1920s or so. So from the 1880s to the 1920s, it went right down Route 11. If you go down Route 11 today between Stanton and Lexington, you can, at various times, you can see the railroad bed. Right before, if you're on the interstate, right at Mint Spring, you can see the big, and you're going south, you can see the big stone bridge on the right there. That's part of it. Further down near Greenville, on Route 11, if you look to the west in the field, you can see some of the railroad bridges still exist. But the railroad died in the 1920s, and the tracks were sold as surplus metal during World War II in the war effort. But so in 1880s, it arrives in Rockbridge County. And what happens is the railroad goes through a place, then they try to figure out where they're going to have a depot and a train stop. So they talk to everybody along the route, and they say, hey, if you donate property, we can put a depot here and you get to name it. And so that's what happened. They got just south of the Augusta County line, because it goes through Spotswood in Augusta County. It really kind of put Spotswood on the map.
So Spotswood was a train depot?
Spotswood was a big train depot, right?
Okay.
And it was very important to the history of Spotswood.
Spelled wrong, right? Not
It's
named after Governor Spotswood.
not named after Governor Spotswood. I think it's named after the well,
That's a whole nother show.
that's a whole nother show. Yes,
Yeah.
we'll have to just tease people along on that. They'll tune in and keep going. So it goes from Spotswood to what now is RAPHINE. And they asked Mr. Gibbs if he'd like to donate land, and he said yes. And they said, well, what do you want to name the place? And he said, well, my house, house is named RAPHINE Hall in honor of my invention, and I would like to name the depot that. And they're like, I suppose I can imagine the conversation. RAPHINE, what is that? And he said, well, I invented the sewing machine. And the Greek word, it's an old Greek word for to sew, is rhaphis. And so RAPHINE becomes what I want to name it. And so that went down in history. There's actually a town in Greece called Rhaphis as well.
Right.
Not spelled the same way. They spell it with an F, or well, actually they have a Greek alphabet. So in Greek, it's not even going to look like we would recognize it.
They probably mispronounced it over there too. So.
Yeah, they maybe do. It apparently my roommate in college was from Greece, and her husband also from Greece, and he told me that it's not a common word now. It's an old word, and but it does mean to sew or needle and thread. And so Rhaphis became RAPHINE, and of course we had to put a little valley dialect on it, so it's RAPHINE. Or
RAPHINE, or whatever.
Some people say RAPHINE, but or RAPHINE, but it's
RAPHINE.
It's RAPHINE here, yes, and after Mr. Gibbs's invention of the sewing machine. So there, we've sewed up that little bit of history.
Please stop. All right. Well, the next time we meet, we're going to be talking about Buena Vista, not to be confused with Buena Vista. And my little trivia, my tease about Buena Vista is do you know what 501 when you're riding through? Because I teach a day a week at Southern Virginia University. When you're going down 60, heading east, like you're going to and take a right, and you take a right. Do you know what that road is called?
If you're heading east,
you go past the Burger King. You take a right there at Hardee's, at the intersection of Hardee's.
Okay.
On 501. Do you know what 501 is called? What Siri calls 501?
What does she call it?
Beach Road. Because that road goes all the way to Myrtle Beach.
So she calls it Beach Road.
That's what she called Beach Road or Beach Boulevard or something like that. I started laughing one day. So anyway.
Well,
it's
there used
to be a sign in Myrtle Beach that said it had a right thing. You'd be going down 17, you take a right, and it would say, it said Buena Vista on the sign. It's not there anymore, but it used to be. And I'm talking about 20 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. And it said Buena Vista 501 because 501 ends at Buena Vista.
Well, it's interesting to hear the pronunciations of on your GPS or on Siri. When we were visiting my niece who graduated from the Naval Academy a couple of years ago, and we were going up to Annapolis, and the GPS called it Annapolis.
Yeah, well, it's very close.
Yeah, Annapolis. And I said, yes, comrade, we're going to Annapolis.
Annapolis. All right. Well, so today, once again, Nancy Sorrells, I'm Richard Adams, and we'll be back for another episode
of Footnotes in History.
In the Valley.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's all right. We'll be back for another episode of Footnotes in Valley History.
That's right. Yeah, sponsored by nobody at this point. But if you want to sponsor
by nobody, but if you have ideas for things you'd like us to scrounge around and figure out, let us know.
And I'll put the emails down here at the bottom, right here, right here.
Right down at the bottom, right down here. Right?
Yeah, we got some high tech stuff in it. All right, thank you, Nancy. Go out and work in your yard.
Okay, unless it rains.
Unless it rains. All right, see you.